Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the smoky, wool-dusted world of a Viking homestead, where the rhythmic scrape of carding combs is about to lull you into the deepest sleep of your life. Picture this, it's 9th century Norway, and you're ducking under the low doorway of a longhouse, the air thick with the scent of burning peat and sheep fat. Your eyes sting from the smoke, but your ears? They're in for a treat. Because for the next few hours, the only soundtrack is the shhhk of wool being combed into soft, drowsy submission. Now, let's be real, you probably wouldn't last 5 minutes here. Between the backbreaking labor and the fact that Viking hygiene involved more lanolin than water, you'd be begging for your memory foam mattress. But lucky for you, all you have to do is sink into your blankets and let the monotony work its magic. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there. Is it 2 a.m. in Tokyo? High noon in Texas? Either way, you're in the right place. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice, aside from the sheep staring at you like you owe it money, is the sound. Two women sit cross-legged by the fire, their hands moving in hypnotic unison as they drag wooden combs through tangled clumps of fleece. The fibers crackle with static, releasing tiny puffs of dust that glitter in the firelight. It's not quite music, but there's a rhythm to it, like listening to rain on a roof, if the rain occasionally sneezed. Mainstream history loves to romanticize Viking raids, but here's the truth, most Vikings spent their days doing stuff like this. Wool carding wasn't just chores, it was the chore. The average household needed enough wool to clothe a small army, and guess what? No Amazon Prime next-day delivery for tunics. Every thread started right here, in this dim, smoky room, with nothing but patience and a pair of combs. Quirkier tidbit? Those combs weren't just tools, they were status symbols. Archaeologists have found some decorated with tiny carved faces, possibly to ward off the dreaded wool demon, a very real fear, according to fringe sagas. And historians still argue whether Vikings preferred oak or birch for their combs, because nothing sparks academic debate like 1,000-year-old grooming supplies. Your eyelids are already getting heavier, aren't they? Good. Because tomorrow's forecast calls for more sheep, more wool, and the shhhk lullaby that's been putting generations of Scandinavians to sleep. The sheep are judging you. You can feel their beady little eyes tracking your every move as you shuffle toward the pen, arms full of freshly shorn fleece. One particularly unimpressive specimen, a shaggy brown ewe with a tuft of wool stuck to her face like a bad mustache, lets out a derisive baa. She knows. She always knows. Because here's the thing about Viking sheep, they weren't the docile, fluffy clouds we picture today. These were Scandinavian sheep, hardy, stubborn, and built like tiny, wool-covered linebackers. Their fleece? Coarse enough to double as armor. Their attitude? Worse than a teenager woken up before noon. But oh, that fleece. You're about to learn why Viking wool was the ultimate multitasker. Sure, it kept people warm, sort of, more on that later, but it was also currency, insulation, and even emergency kindling in a pinch. The Vikings didn't just have sheep, they depended on them like we depend on Wi-Fi. Lose your flock, and congratulations. You're now a naked, penniless peasant. Mainstream fact, Viking sheep were so valuable, laws dictated exactly how far they could graze from the farmstead. Stray too far, and some grumpy chieftain would fine you in butter, yes, butter, the medieval equivalent of paying your parking tickets in avocado toast. Quirky tidbit? Those same laws also required farmers to sing to their sheep during storms. Historians still argue whether this was actual animal husbandry or just Vikings being Vikings. Of course the livestock need a bedtime ballad, Olaf. Either way, picture a burly, bearded man crooning lullabies to a disinterested sheep during a blizzard, and tell me that's not the coziest thing you've imagined today. Now, back to that fleece in your arms. It smells like, well, imagine a gym sock stuffed with wet grass and regret. But buried under that aroma is the secret to Viking survival, lanolin. That greasy, golden wax coating each strand is nature's built-in moisturizer, waterproofing agent, and, if you were a particularly desperate Viking, emergency lip balm. Your hands are already softening as you work, the lanolin turning your skin supple. It's oddly satisfying, like the medieval equivalent of a spa day, if spas also involve dodging sheep's side-eye and wondering if that's mud or something worse in the wool. Your fingers meet the first comb, and suddenly you understand why Viking toddlers were given these things as teething toys, because nothing in the medieval world made a more satisfying thwick sound than two wooden paddles full of iron teeth coming together. The carding combs are heavier than they look, each one about the size of your face and studded with rows of tiny metal spikes that glint dully in the firelight. They look like torture devices, and let's be honest, to the sheep, they probably were. But in your hands, they transform into something almost musical, a percussion instrument for the world's most repetitive lullaby. Thwick. 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 Mainstream history will tell you these combs were functional, but here's what they don't mention: Vikings were low-key obsessed with decorating them. Some have carved serpentine handles that bite their own tails. Others sport cheeky runes like, "Kara owns this comb, stop stealing it, Bjorn," proving that passive-aggressive roommate notes are truly timeless. Now for the fringe archaeology gem. In 2018, a dig in Sweden turned up a comb buried with a child, its teeth meticulously filed smooth. Was it a toy? A memorial? Or, as one particularly dramatic scholar insists, proof of a Viking, carding prodigy, who died tragically young? The sagas do mention a legendary 6-year-old who could card wool so fine it floated like mist, but historians still argue whether that's fact or just Viking tall tales. You settle into the rhythm, the comb teeth catching knots and teasing them apart. It's harder than it looks. Your first few attempts leave clumps so lumpy they'd make a Viking grandmother sigh into her mead. But slowly, the wool begins to transform from a tangled mess into something resembling order. Funny how that's the universal experience, isn't it? Whether you're a 9th century farmer or a modern-day listener fighting with a knotted headphone cord, that moment when chaos finally yields to patience? Chef's kiss. Pro tip from the sagas: the best carders worked near the fire not just for light, but because warmth made the lanolin more pliable. Of course, this also meant occasionally singeing your eyebrows off, a small price to pay for silky smooth wool, and, presumably, the world's first accidental Viking punk hairstyles. The rhythm takes hold of you now, thwickashhk, thwickashhk, until your breathing syncs with the scrape of the combs. It's the Viking equivalent of a metronome, steady as a heartbeat, relentless as ocean waves. And just like that, you're not just carding wool anymore. You're part of an ancient trance, one that's lured countless minds into that delicious halfway place between focus and daydream. Turns out, Viking work songs were made for moments like this. Simple, repetitive chants about fish, or weather, or that time Eric got embarrassingly drunk at the thing, again. No complex melodies, just a droning bass line of sound to keep hands moving and minds pleasantly empty. Historians found one particularly sleepy example from Greenland that's basically just the words, pull the wool, the sea is cold, the wool is warm, on loop for 20 minutes. Mainstream fact: this wasn't just about passing time. Studies show repetitive motions paired with monotonous sounds can drop your brain into alpha waves faster than a modern meditation app. The Vikings didn't know neuroscience, But they knew this. After 3 hours of carding, even the most hardened warrior would be yawning into his beard. Now for the bizarre bit. Some sagas mention Ulfram, wolf-tranced, workers who could card for days without sleep. Modern scholars think these were probably people with rare sleep disorders, but the Vikings believed they'd been bitten by mythical wool wolves. Yes, that's exactly as ridiculous as it sounds. No, it didn't stop them from telling the stories with absolute sincerity. Your hands keep moving, but your thoughts start doing that floaty thing where the line between wool and clouds and sleep gets wonderfully blurry. The fire pops. Someone yawns. The sheep outside bleats a complaint that no one answers. Thwick. 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 Historians still argue whether Vikings ever used wool carding as actual punishment, like medieval timeout for rowdy kids. Given how effective it is at draining energy, maybe they should have. Your fingertips have taken on a strange, waxy sheen, the kind that would make a modern dermatologist gasp, but has Viking women nodding in approval. That's lanolin, nature's original hand cream, seeping into your skin with every tug of the wool. It smells vaguely like a barnyard, but your hands haven't been this soft since, well, ever. Fun fact, Viking healers used lanolin-soaked wool as primitive band-aids, wrapping wounds in what they called fleece medicine. Modern experiments show it actually worked surprisingly well. The lanolin created a semi-sterile barrier while the wool fibers wicked away moisture. Of course, this also meant your bandage might randomly sprout bits of hay, but hey, early medicine was all about compromise. Mainstream history loves to harp on about Viking swords, but here's the truth. The real MVP of Norse survival was this greasy, golden goo. Waterproofing cloaks? Lanolin. Preventing wind-chapped faces? Lanolin. That suspiciously glossy beard Earl Olaf was always stroking? Definitely lanolin. Now for the weirdest application. Viking sailors allegedly rubbed lanolin into their leather boots, then drank the leftover wax mixed with mead as a storm preventative. Historians still argue whether this was A. An early placebo effect, B. A very creative excuse to day drink, C. Proof that sea air does strange things to human judgment. Your palms glide through the wool now with newfound slickness. There's something primal about this satisfaction, the way your body just knows this substance is valuable, even if your modern brain is busy going, ew, sheep sweat. The fire crackles. The combs click. And without realizing it, you've started humming. It might be the lanolin fumes. It might be the hypnotic rhythm. Or it might be that you've officially become part of the longhouse furniture, just another contented, slightly greasy cog in the wool-making machine. The rhythmic carding continues, but now your ears perk up at something new, gossip. Low, murmuring voices weave between the shhhk of the combs, trading the juiciest headlines of 9th century Scandinavia. Did you hear? Gudrid's new loom tension is scandalously loose. They say Thorkel's beard oil is just rendered squirrel fat. 5 silver coins says Bjorn's imported wool is just re-dyed local stuff. Turns out, wool carding time was the Viking equivalent of a podcast recording booth, where news, rumors, and absolutely unfounded accusations flowed as freely as mead. Without social media or town criers, this was how information traveled, through the hands of tired women multitasking like their lives depended on it, because, let's be honest, they kind of did. Mainstream fact, the Icelandic sagas contain entire subplots that historians believe originated as woolworking gossip. That dramatic scene where someone's sword accidentally slips during a duel? Probably started as some carters, oh please, Helgi totally planned that, hot take 3 farms over. But here's the delightful fringe theory. Some linguists argue that the particular cadence of Old Norse poetry, with its sharp, rhythmic beats, evolved from woolworking sounds. Imagine epic Viking rap battles, but with more sheep references and fewer mic drops. You call that a verse? Your rhymes are as loose as uncarded wool. Historians still argue whether certain sagas were literally written in wool sheds. The Flateyjarbók manuscript contains suspicious wool fibers in its ink. Coincidence, or the world's first writer's block coping mechanism? Your hands keep moving, but your mind wanders to modern equivalents. Podcast hosts with their fancy microphones think they're so innovative, please. Viking women were dropping truth bombs while elbow-deep in lanolin centuries before Joe Rogan was a twinkle in history's eye. The gossip fades as someone starts humming again. The fire pops. Outside, a sheep brays what might be agreement or might be commentary on your carding technique. Either way, the rhythm claims you once more. Thwickishhk, the original ASMR. A draft sneaks through the longhouse walls, making the firelight flicker, and suddenly you feel it. That prickle on your neck. The sense that someone, somewhere, is watching. But when you glance up, all you see is old Helga squinting at her wool like it personally offended her. Then you remember the stories. They say Norse witches, vulvas, could weave spells right into uncarded wool. Not with fancy incantations, but through the simple, sinister power of counting. Card 1 strand for sickness, 2 for storms, 3 for a rival's bad harvest. The most feared women in Scandinavia might have looked like harmless grandmas, right up until your sheep started giving blue milk. Mainstream history confirms Viking magic was deeply tied to textiles. Archaeologists find amulet bags stuffed with wool, some still containing what experts delicately call organic ritual materials, reed, probably toenails. But here's the creepy cool part, some sagas describe trolldom, witchcraft, as literally the turning of wool. Historians still argue whether this meant A. Actual wool manipulation, B. Metaphors about fate's threads, C. Vikings really needing better hobbies. Your current clump of fleece seems innocent enough, until you spot a weirdly straight fiber. Too straight. Almost like. Don't pull that one, Helga mutters without looking up. Bad luck. Turns out, witchy wool had tells, odd colors, unnatural smoothness, or, allegedly, faint humming when no one was carding. The solution? Burn it with juniper. Or, if you were feeling petty, sneak it into your enemy's next sweater. The fire pops loudly, making you jump. Helga cackles. Outside, the wind moans through the thatch, or is that a vulva somewhere, counting strands and chuckling? Thwick. 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 Fun fact, this is why Vikings believed in knitted spells. Still think your grandma's itchy Christmas sweater was innocent? A small hand tugs your sleeve. You look down into the dirt-smudged face of a Viking child, maybe 5 summers old, holding a miniature carding comb like it's the most important sword in Midgard. Without a word, they plop down beside you and start attacking a tuft of wool with terrifying toddler focus. Welcome to the Viking version of daycare. By age 5, Norse kids were expected to help with wool work, which mostly meant producing lumpy, saliva-coated clumps that adults would discreetly recard later. But here's the genius part, those tiny hands were perfect for teasing out the finest undercoat fibers, the stuff that made luxury cloaks so soft they allegedly made French traders weep. Mainstream fact, childhood labor laws? Not a thing. But Viking parents weren't monsters, kids got paid in honey treats and the occasional carved toy. Archaeologists find tiny combs buried with children, some worn smooth from years of use. Now for the weirdness. One Icelandic saga describes a wool prodigy infant who could allegedly card while sleeping. The kid supposedly grew up to become law speaker Orkel, who, in a shocking twist, hated wool taxes. Coincidence? Historians still argue. Your new little coworker sneezes directly onto the fleece, then keeps working like nothing happened. Hygiene standards, flexible. Productivity standards, ironclad. The rhythm changes now, your steady thwick-shk punctuated by the kid's erratic tap-scritch-tap. It shouldn't be soothing, but somehow it is. Like listening to rainfall with the occasional acorn plunk. A mother calls from across the longhouse. The child abandons their wool, now suspiciously sticky, and toddles off. You're alone again with the fire, the combs, and the dawning realization that Viking parenting was basically, here, hold this pointy thing and stay alive. Dark thought, this might explain why so many sagas involve people dramatically swearing oaths as children. They were probably just hopped up on lanolin fumes and power naps. You scratch your neck absently, then freeze. That's not an itch. That's movement. Welcome to the dark underbelly of Viking fashion, lice the size of sesame seeds staging a full-scale invasion down your tunic collar. Turns out, all that cozy wool came with six-legged roommates who didn't pay rent. Mainstream archaeology confirms it. Excavated Viking combs frequently contain pediculus humanus remains, the fanciest way to say, our ancestors were crawling. But here's the kicker. Some lice strains found in York match those from 10th century Constantinople, proving itchy travelers spread more than just trade goods. Now for the bizarre part, Vikings had a whole lice hierarchy. Head lice? Annoying but normal. Body lice? Sign of poverty. Pubic lice? According to the Grogus laws, grounds for divorce, and presumably some awkward family meetings. Your carting slows as you spot a fat louse strolling across your wool like it owns the place. Time for the nuclear option, the knit comb. This double-sided horror show had regular teeth on one end and microfine spikes on the other, basically a medieval lice demilitarized zone. Historians still argue whether Vikings used A. Mercury ointments, effective but deadly. B. Henbane smoke, hallucinogenic but festive. C. Just accepting their fate, the Viking way. You opt for the Viking equivalent of ignore it and hope for winter. The fire pops. The lice throw what you swear is a tiny celebration. Outside, a sheep bleats what sounds suspiciously like laughter. Fun fact, this is why wealthy Vikings lined their hoods with silk, not for luxury, but because lice can't grip it. The original bug-out bag. Thwick. Thk, thwick. Thk. The rhythm continues, the lice party migrates south, and you make a mental note to burn these clothes later. A sudden squeak makes you glance up, just in time to see a Baltic merchant dramatically press his ear against a bundle of wool like it's confessing secrets. He nods solemnly, then proclaims, "This one sings of Jutland storms," before tossing it aside. Welcome to the weird world of Viking wool QA, where buyers judged quality by the squeak of fibers rubbed together. High pitch equals good loft. How well it held rainwater. If it dripped through in seconds, you'd been scammed. Whether a bored trader could spin elaborate backstories about its origins. Mainstream history shows Baltic traders were the sommeliers of sheep products. Their records mention wool that smelled of spring heather, premium price, versus stank of depressed livestock, bargain bin. But here's the quirky bit. Some sagas describe singing fleeces, batches that allegedly hummed when carded during certain moon phases. Modern textile engineers suggest this was just resinous plant matter vibrating in dry wool. But try telling that to a 10th century merchant swearing he heard Ragnarok in a sweater's worth of Shetland. Your current clump gets a critical side-eye from the merchant. He grabs it, gives two brisk rubs, scritch, and frowns. This wool dreams of laziness. Historians still argue whether Viking wool grading was A. An elaborate scam, B. Proto-performance art, C. Proof that seasonal affective disorder hits hard near the Arctic Circle. The rejected wool lands back in your lap with a judgmental poof. Outside, the sheep chorus continues its critique of your life choices. Thwick. 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 Fun fact, this is why Norse traders were said to have ears like seals and souls like accountants. Also why your sweater's label should probably say 50% lanolin, 50% gilt. A sudden thwack makes you jump. Someone's just thrown a half-spun yarn ball at the wall with enough force to rattle the drying herbs. Useless, a spinner snarls in your direction, glaring at your carefully carded wool like it personally insulted her ancestors. Congratulations! You've stumbled into the Viking textile industry's coldest war, carders versus spinners. Mainstream history glosses over this, but the sagas drip with hints. There's Erbygja saga's infamous wool strike, where carders allegedly sabotaged fibers by leaving in knots like Loki's lies. Then there's the Gotlandic law stating spinners could legally fine carders for lumps resembling old porridge. Your crime? Apparently carding too thoroughly. This fleece has no character, the spinner huffs, demonstrating how your flawlessly smooth wool slips right off her spindle. She wants some imperfections, just enough to give the yarn something to hold on to, a phrase that still gives textile historians migraines. Now for the bizarre archaeological find. A Danish grave contained both a carder and spinner buried back to back, with a woven barrier between them. Coincidence? Or Scandinavia's pettiest post-mortem feud? Historians still argue whether A. This rivalry was economic, spinners were paid per skein. B. Psychological, repetitive stress-induced rage. C. Performance art, Viking Jerry Springer auditions. You attempt a peace offering, a slightly lumpier batch. The spinner tests it, nods grudgingly, then mutters what might be thanks or a death threat. Old Norse is so ambiguous sometimes. The fire pops. The sheep outside chorus their unsolicited opinions. And you? You've just become an unwitting participant in history's most niche labor dispute. Thwick. 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 Pro tip. Tomorrow's batch should include exactly 2 burrs per square foot. For structural integrity. Obviously. The wind howls outside like a pack of frostbitten wolves, shaking the longhouse walls with each gust. But inside? Inside is a cocoon of wool, body heat, and the kind of drowsy productivity that only happens when the world beyond your doorstep has become utterly uninhabitable. Blizzard's transformed Viking will work from chore to survival ritual. With snowdrift swallowing houses whole, carding became less about making clothes and more about not losing your mind during months of Arctic darkness. Mainstream history loves Viking explorers, but here's the truth. Most winter days looked like this, endless fiber prep by firelight, punctuated by snack breaks, dried fish, nature's sad jerky. The Laxdala saga describes household stockpiling, enough wool to choke a giant, before winter. Not poetic exaggeration, excavated Norwegian farms had wool stores literally weighing tons. Now for the weirdest survival tactic. Some Norse believed vigorous carding could ward off frost spirits. The logic? Malevolent ice creatures supposedly hated the sound, thwick, almost as much as they hated fire. Did it work? Well, nobody froze while carding, so. Your fingers move slower now, numbed by cold and repetition. The rhythm has become something between meditation and muscle memory. Thwick. Thwick. Historians still argue whether Vikings experienced seasonal affective disorder. But when you find 10th century graffiti that says, Thor, Please make the sun come back. I will card so many socks, it's pretty damning evidence. A yawn ripples through the longhouse. Someone starts snoring softly near the fire. The blizzard rages on, but here in this wool-dusted bubble, time stretches like freshly pulled fibers, endless, soothing, and strangely sacred. Pro tip: this is why Norse mythology has Wyrd, the fate-weaving goddess. After 6 winters like this, you'd start seeing divine spinners too. A particularly aggressive thwick sends a puff of wool dust into the air, and suddenly you're sneezing so hard you see stars. When your vision clears, the old man across from you is grinning through his beard. Thor's blessing, he cackles, as if the god of thunder personally tickled your sinuses. Turns out, Vikings linked wool work to divinity more than you'd think. That fleece in your hands? Potentially sacred. Thor's connection to wool was complicated. Some myths claim his chariot goat's fur magically regrew each dawn, convenient. Others say he gifted humanity the first carding combs after a night of very creative drinking. Mainstream fact: temple excavations show Viking priests wore uncarded wool tunics as a sign of humility, itchy theology at its finest. But here's the fringe theory that'll keep you awake, or not. Since this is a sleep podcast, the Voluspa prophecy mentions golden fleeces covering the world after Ragnarok. Most scholars assume this is poetic, but what if it's literal? Post-apocalyptic Viking survival gear? Your current clump of wool takes on new weight. Is that lanolin glint just firelight, or something more? The old man winks like he knows. Historians still argue whether A. Sacred wool was a metaphor for clouds. B. Actual ritual fleeces existed. C. The controversial Freya's fleece sagas. C. Vikings just really needed to justify all those sheep. The fire pops. Someone murmurs a prayer to Uller. Your sneeze-induced end-times vision fades, leaving only the familiar Thwickishhk and the growing certainty that Vikings would have made excellent conspiracy theorists. The comb in your hand snaps. Not dramatically, just a quiet crack as one tooth gives up the ghost after what was clearly a very long, very lanolin-soaked life. You stare at the broken implement, struck by the intimacy of holding someone else's worn-out tool. This is how archaeologists reconstruct lives, through the stuff. Like the 9th century carding comb found in a Danish latrine, because even Vikings had junk drawers. Its owner carved tiny notches along the handle, tally marks. A calendar? Or just someone counting the days until retirement? Mainstream science can trace that combs wood to a now extinct Norwegian birch grove. The iron teeth came from a mine near modern-day Oslo. The wear patterns suggest left-handed use, rare enough that some scholars think it belonged to a disabled crafter. But here's the haunting detail: the last inch of wood is smooth, polished by decades of thumb rubs from someone who probably never imagined their comb would outlive their language. Historians still argue whether A. The latrine deposit was accidental. B. Intentional. Some Norse believed tools should die with their owners. C. Vikings just had really confusing filing systems. Your replacement comb feels alien in your grip. The rhythm stumbles, then finds itself again. Thwick. 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 Outside, the wind carries seabird cries. Inside, generations of carders whisper in every splinter and groove. You're not just preparing wool anymore, you're adding another layer to the archaeology of everyday life. Future scholars will probably overanalyze your lanolin stains too. Hope you're ready for that fame. The rhythm has seeped into your bones now. Thwickishhk, Thwickishhk, a metronome for the soul. Outside, dawn pinks the horizon, or is it dusk? After hours of carding, time has dissolved into wool. Vikings didn't have a word for mindfulness, but they'd recognize this feeling: hands moving, thoughts quiet, the world narrowed to fibers and firelight. Modern life screams for attention. Here, the only demand is to keep the rhythm alive. Mainstream psychology confirms repetitive motions lower cortisol. Fringe science claims lanolin contains trace tryptophan. But you don't need studies, your drooping eyelids are evidence enough. Historians still argue whether Viking work songs were designed to A. Coordinate labor. B. Preserve oral history. C. Stop people from actually losing their minds during endless wool marathons. The last fleece slips from your fingers. Around the longhouse, others have surrendered to sleep. Sprawled on wool bales, slumped against walls, one snoring into a half-cartered pile like it's the world's scratchiest pillow. You should move. You should check those blisters. But the fire's down to embers, and the sheep outside have finally stopped judging, and the combs rest quiet in laps like sleeping animals. Thwick, no, that was just the roof settling. The wind hums through the thatch. Somewhere, a spindle rolls across the floor. And just like that, centuries collapse, because tired is tired, whether your boots are leather or Nikes, whether your bed is straw or memory foam. The wool doesn't care. The rhythm doesn't care. It just continues, endless and forgiving, long after your hands still. Wind down. Breathe in, lanolin and peat smoke. Breathe out, centuries of tension. The fire's glow fades to ghostlight now, painting the longhouse in liquid shadows. Wool dust drifts like lazy snowflakes. Somewhere beyond these walls, sheep doze in their pen, their fleece already regrowing for tomorrow's carding. This is the secret they never teach in history books. Vikings didn't just endure their days, they ritualized them. Turned chores into cadence. Wove monotony into something almost sacred. Your fingers uncurl. Your head nods. The last coherent thought slips away, something about lanolin being nature's original sleep aid, or maybe that's just the exhaustion talking. It doesn't matter now. The combs are still. The sagas can wait. Outside, the stars will over a world that's somehow softer than when you began, spun through with invisible threads of care, patience, and countless tiny, tender repetitions. Sleep well, time traveler. The wool will keep.